as my custom so far, to start with the cute joke, not take it too seriously. Just to warm up, it's hard to just jump into the higher worlds. So this Chassid walks into a bar in Manhattan, okay, and he's got all the Hasidic garb, black rock coat, whatever. He's got pale, the beard, all Hasidic look. Sits down at the bar, and of course he has also, of course, he has also a frog sitting on his shoulder. Well, the bartender comes up, and the first thing he says is, "Where did you get that?" And the frog says, "I got it in Borough Park. There's lots of them there." Okay. So, what can we make of this joke? Not too much, but let's say the frog is the soul. Okay. We think we're dealing with the body. The bartender is talking to this Hasidic gentleman there, and his frog, his soul, is really what's responding. And here too, we're talking about stuff in the Torah and even here in the Kabbalah, which looks like things about what we're supposed to do and how we live the body, but it's really lessons for the soul, and it's through the soul that we're speaking. That's all I can say about that cute joke. Okay. Now, I just want to say in general that I'm not really that interested in hearing myself talk for an hour. So if you do have questions and you want to bring up things for discussion on the topic, it would be greatly appreciated. And I thought maybe to start that off, I'll ask a question to see if you're listening. Supposing we were, many people say we learned from physics so much about leadership. We were going back to the Big Bang, whatever it was, tens of billions of light years from here, and so backwards in times, and light takes time to travel. If we go back to that, would we be closer to the creation? That's my question to you. Anyone want to answer?
Why would you think we would not be closer?
What?
Why would you think we would not be closer?
Aha. So you think that we would be closer to the creation?
Well,
no, I don't think we would. Because creation occurred before time.
Okay, creation outside of time, Bruce. He says so he wouldn't be closer. Anybody else want to chime in? Well, I'm going to go with you. And that's my point. That indeed, what we are talking here, when we're talking about other worlds, higher states of consciousness, higher realities, however we speak about it, we're talking about another dimension. And we think in terms of our material world in 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions of space, and the 4th dimension of time. And the creation that we're referring to here, when we say Bereshit, bara Elohim, it's usually translated in the beginning, God created. Well, this beginning is not a beginning in time. Indeed, the Zohar, when it looks at that first verse of the Torah, it doesn't translate in the beginning, Bereshit, in the beginning, but Reshit is a code word for the sphera of Chokhmah, right? We say Reshit Chokhmah Yirat Hashem, right? So the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. So Chokhmah, which is, as we'll be talking about, the second sphera on the list of 10, is what has created Reshit, with Reshit, Bereshit, with Reshit, with Chokhmah, God, creator, created what? Created Elohim. Elohim is a code word for the sphera of Bina. So the Kabbalah sees the story of creation, which we have there in the beginning of the Torah, not as a story about what took place some, 5,000-6,000 years ago or something like that, in a process in time, but a process which is outside of time, and therefore can be seen as happening within, so to speak, each moment or outside of a moment. So right now, so to speak, outside of time, in this other dimension, the process of creation, a process I refer to as not something that takes place in time, but a logical process that we're analyzing. That process takes place outside of time. The question is, how can we understand this fifth dimension? I just want to give some further introductory remarks before we get to the text, and I think then we'll be able to read the text and appreciate it more um, as we consider some of these sides. So, how do we understand what this fifth dimension is? Is there any way that we can experience this or sense this fifth dimension, this idea of levels of reality, being, levels of divinity? Um, well, some of you may be familiar with the book Flatland, which tries to give the idea of the problematics in sensing another dimension. So the Flatland, it describes a world of two dimensions, where all the beings are either squares or triangles or circles and things like that. And then how is it that they could possibly sense that there is some other dimension? They have no way of sensing that with the senses they have. They live within this two-dimensional world. But I prepared something here. I don't know if this can be seen. Supposing this is our two-dimensional world, right? And there's a three-dimensional object, a sphere, which has contact with it. Now, the people in the two-dimensional world here would not know about this, but they would see suddenly that there would be a circle that would appear as the sphere enters into their plane. And as the sphere would move through that plane, which they wouldn't really sense, but they would see that the circle got bigger and bigger until the circle moves through and then disappears. So all they see is a little circle which gets bigger and bigger, and then it gets smaller and smaller, and then disappears. And then all their, wise people may come and try to make up some theory. What is this idea of a circle getting bigger and smaller, disappearing? How can it happen? And somebody might come up with a bright idea. Well, maybe there's another dimension, and there's this sphere moving. I mean, come up with this theory, right? And so they would postulate another dimension. And so I ask you, then, this fifth dimension that we are speaking of, the presence of God, if you will, is that something that we can sense and then, perhaps make a theory about some intervention of this divinity with our world? Anyone have an answer to that?
Well, based on the model you showed, we can't even perceive of a dimension that's outside our abilities. So it's sort of everything is theoretical because we can't even imagine what other dimensions would exist.
Well, in my example, as I said, with the flatland and the two-dimensional thing, there would be an appearance of a circle that would get bigger and smaller and disappear.
Well, as it comes into our understanding.
Is there any phenomena like that in our world that would
God
hint
doesn't have a
to
dimension.
what?
God doesn't have a dimension. It's like it's there. It's we're thinking physical. Dimension is a physical thing. God doesn't have a dimension.
Okay, but here we are. We're talking about the idea of something, between God and the finality of the creation as the desire to receive in order to receive. Before we're going to see how that process works, that there are these different worlds and different spheroids and everything. Can we have any sense of divinity in our world? My answer is yes. And the theory that describes to us this kind of thing is what we call the Torah. right? Which we see, that this talks about miracles and other ways in which God intervenes within his creation, things that have been experienced perhaps historically, and a certain theory about what is taking place there is that God is getting involved with our world. That is, we're sensing the existence of the higher reality within this lower reality. Now that actually can get very complex, and there can be a great deal of debate about how that actually works and this whole theory and everything like that. But I just want to get, what would be the sense of this fifth dimension? Because I do call it a dimension, because if we take a look at what science does study, right, the four-dimensional world that we've heard to before, we see that science works by measuring things, right? Science works by quantity, by number, right? And everything that we can actually call science, this thing that works by a certain kind of method that we can produce results and make predictions. The predictions have to do with measuring certain things. So they deal with quantity. And what science does not deal with is quality, with values, with meanings, with purposes. These are the kind of thing that science just doesn't touch. It's not within the scope of science whatsoever.
Would you say that those things are subjective?
No. Because let me explain a little bit about subjective and objective, okay? In philosophy, subjective refers to something which depends upon the subject, right? So that one subject may see a certain reality, has a certain perspective, another subject has a different perspective, but there's some objective reality out there, we postulate, independent of their subjective perspectives. That's the idea of subjective and objective, okay? But no, here we're talking about the idea that we can, of course, everything we experience is from our point of view, that's true, but we can say that I see objectively that there is a computer here before me, right? And it's not just my subjective opinion that there is a computer, that's something objective. And similarly, we can say that we can experience objective reality, which is of a higher sort than our usual reality that we refer to as this world. Let me explain again what this fifth dimension might be. Right? So I talked about value. So we think of God as being perfection, as being the highest good. So different levels of reality might have different qualities of goodness. They might have different qualities of value. They might have different levels of meaning. God would be the ultimate value, ultimate meaning, ultimate value, ultimate good, right? The perfection of that. But between this world, in which we don't necessarily open up our eyes and just see meaning and see value, right? But it's something that how we interpret our reality. It's not something that we obviously see with our physical eyes. So between this world and that world, there might be then levels of meaning, levels of value. And that would be then an understanding of what this fifth dimension of levels of divinity, if you will, that there are. Now, one thing that we have to say right away is that this is not polytheism. Right? We're not saying that there are many gods. Right? There's only one God that creates all of this reality and all the different levels that it has. Okay, but and nonetheless, oh wait a second, I lost my view of you. Sorry, there you are back. And nonetheless, we say that there are such things as these different levels, And we're going to explain as we go on here exactly how that gets analyzed into different ways. So that
Aren't you basically describing time? Because time and change go hand in hand. They can't exist one without the other. But
okay,
God doesn't change. God is outside time.
right. So I am not describing time. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. This is something he said which takes place outside of time, which doesn't really register within our brain. We don't think in those terms, right? But Arthur, you pointed out that it is outside of time. So although there is a change here, we're referring to a change from higher worlds to lower worlds, and in that sense, it's a different conception of time, if you will, because there's change involved, but it's not a change that takes place in time. This is not a process that takes place in time. We're talking about the process of creation, right? We're analyzing this in terms of levels of the divine quality of desire to give selflessly and the worldly quality of desiring to receive selfishly, and their levels of this, right? And levels what I call the value of meaning. And so there is a sense of change as we describe what is in this level or that level or that level or that level, but it's not a change that takes place in time. It's a change within our description of this reality, which is timeless. Okay?
Aryeh, I mean, I think we have trouble imagining things that are not in time. So is it correct to say that it's keilu, it's like it's always happening? Is that a way around that? That it's not that it happened once and then it stopped happening, that it's always happening, that this is happening now, it was happening yesterday, it'll happen next week.
Right.
Is
Well,
that
if our eyes were to be opened and we could see this other dimension, then there would be, then in every moment of time, that would be available to be seen.
Okay.
So in that sense, okay. But
Okay.
if we say it's happening always, and it sounds like it's happening in time. But in what I said, at any moment in time, if we could open our eyes and see the fifth dimension, right, and see the levels of God, that's what we want to do, to sense God's presence, right? And we do that by using some sense that we have within ourselves. That's what's beautiful, I think, about the Ashlag approach to the Kabbalah, is that we are talking about something which we can sense, the sense in which I am there for the other or not. Right?
Why do you presume we'd want to get that? Why do you presume we'd like to get that sense?
I'm sorry, would you say?
You said there's a desire to get that sense of God's presence.
Yes.
Why presume that that's a fact?
Why? And again, I'm sorry, the words you're asking, why do we have that desire?
Why do we presume
that? Yeah, why presume that we have that desire?
Oh, well, first of all, according to the Kabbala, we're understanding that's the whole idea, the idea of creation, that God has created us both with the desire to receive for ourselves and with the desire to be close to Him, to have that quality of selfless giving. That's the story. Second of all, if we go within our experience, I think we recognize that is the case, that it is something that we do. Love is something that we are all searching for. And that love is the connection, that empathy, that feeling of the other, the feeling that we are together, the sense that indeed we are one soul. And to the extent that we can experience that, I think then we have experience of tremendous pleasure and tremendous satisfaction. So I think that is something that we are definitely seeking. Yes. Okay.
I think it's very subjective, as everything else you've been saying.
I'm talking about our experience within ourselves. So of course it is subjective, but that's not bad because that's reality. There is an inner reality, right? Which is what we're referring to. And that necessarily is something of the subject experiencing him or herself, right? And so therefore it is subjective. But that's the way in through, that's the rabbit hole through which we can go into, then discover this wonderful world of divinity.
I say that because if I think Susan, as a psychologist, if you did a survey among people, some scientific survey with a list of their desires of what they'd like to acquire or seek out, and you listed, I don't know, 50 things. It could be that this one is very far down the list.
Well, it is.
So when
actually,
you have conclusions, just making some conclusions from that.
Because there are studies like that. And as someone who has studied logotherapy, Viktor Frankl's approach to psychotherapy, which he said what man or what people are searching for is meaning, right? So they've done studies like this, and they found overwhelmingly that indeed what people are searching for is meaning. And meaning ultimately, I mean, where does meaning come from? Ultimately, meaning comes ultimately, I say, from God. That's why my essays that I wrote, there's no meaning without ultimate meaning. So the source of meaning is God. And anyone who is searching for meaning and will ask where that meaning comes from and look for further meaning behind that meaning will eventually continue that search, will come to the idea of God as the source of meaning. That is my claim. Okay, so I say people are searching for it. You can do the scientific study. I think you'll find that that is where people find satisfaction. And what our sages have said here in this context is that anyone who is looking for stuff, to get pleasure and things that fill his self-interest, well, he'll get a certain amount, and what he wants is then more, and they'll want more, and then more, and there'll never be full satisfaction. The only way to find satisfaction, indeed, is to find it in connection to the other, and the other ultimately being God.
So what does Shlomo say at the end of Kohelet? He's the man who's searching for ultimate meaning. What is his last pursuit? What is his conclusion there?
Yeah, what is it?
Well, I'm asking you. You may know better than me. I mean,
okay,
I thought he said, do mitzvot, eat,
yes,
drink, love the woman you're with, be with your family, be happy, and enjoy your life.
Well, I'm going to say
within this. I don't think he says seek out God.
The fear of God and the serving of God. Let's see what Susan picks up at the last verse. Susan, what do you have?
I'm not there yet. I'm looking.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's the thing we say after we finish hearing.
Yeah,
right? It's like something about God and keeping His commandments.
Yes.
Here, I found it. Kohelet.
But it's not an intellectual conclusion. It's sort of it's a very living conclusion.
So
don't say you got to do.
I understand what you're saying.
The English translation is the final word. It has all been said. Hold God in awe and heed His commands, for that is all man has. So, that's Rabbi Sachs' translation.
Okay, so first of all, we want to recognize the greatness of God. Okay, and that's on the positive side. And on the second side, we want to heed His command. We don't want to do anything that would in any way harm that connection that we have with Him. We want to be always connected. The mitzvot from the language of safta, of being together, is something that connects us with God. And we want to constantly be occupied with that. So, Bruce, while we go through our life, and of course, we want to, inhabit the world and and develop the world and do all those things as we do. So positive thing, God wants us to do that, all as part of realizing the idea of creation, and that is that we should all see that as having its source in God. That is the idea.
Once you see that, and God is you're in awe of God. I see that as a distance. Awe of something doesn't mean I have to understand it. I'm just in awe of it. and the rest is commentary, and then you're doing all the commandments. But there's a lot of doing, not a lot of thinking.
There are two aspects to all. There's both the idea of being drawn towards something and seeing its greatness, and second of all, because of the difference between this greatness and our lowliness, and so there is, and then also our bringing back. So there is that element of tension in that all there, and that's part of a process, exactly the process again that we're talking about here, and what it's like to get close to Hashem. The more that we purify our heart, as I spoke at the end of the last session 2 weeks ago, the more that we purify our intention in being there for the other, the more we will be able to see the divine, and the more that we will feel closer to it and more appropriate that we can be close to it, because we have that purity of intention. And that's what, unfortunately, we are lacking to a great degree, and we need to work on. Okay, we have to see how we're going to go about doing it. I just want to say one last word about the idea of, I mentioned science and the other approach, which is the Torah. Usually when we think of science, Bruce, you may think that science gives us all the knowledge about everything. That's what's called scientism. It doesn't just value science. It says that all knowledge comes from science, from that. And therefore, it gets to a reductionism. It says that everything that we see, and all these elements that I mentioned before, which might give us a sense of the divine, all those elements are really just stuff that happens here in the material world. And in that way, it's reducing the worlds of value that I'm referring to, the higher worlds, it's reducing that to this world. And so that's a reduction in value. That's a reductionism. What we're referring here as emanation, right? Seeing that the higher worlds emanate the lower worlds, is recognizing that the lower world is emanated from a higher world, something of more value. And therefore, we're adding value to what is here in this world by seeing it as having its source in the divine.
There may be a little bit of a straw man argument regarding science. I mean, I think science is really just whatever you think you know, it should be data or empirically based. Otherwise, you don't know it. You may believe it, you may think it, but science is just the ability to know something that's data oriented. The reduction may be more of a religious concept.
We have to get into a philosophical discussion of what constitutes knowledge and what doesn't.
Well, I'm just saying data, just data oriented.
You are taking the position of scientism, which says that only science is what can give us knowledge. I disagree with that. That's all. Let's not discuss that.
I think it muddles it to get all wound up about science. But I think Bruce is making an important point, which is that many people would look within themselves and not necessarily see any of these desires that we're speaking about, that you're sharing with us, the desire to draw close to God. It's certainly not the only desire anyone has. And for a given person, it may be a desire that comes up relatively infrequently. It might even be that in their entire life, it never comes up at all. And that's just the truth about that life for that person. But I think rather than worry about what everybody experiences, we could ask ourselves, in my life, has there been an experience like that where I felt that desire in me? And if the answer is yes, even once, then that's part of the picture of the data that I have about my inner life.
You said, thank you. And if we want to increase that, then the way to do that is to do the kind of learning that we're doing right here, and also come in contact with those who have truly realized this purification of soul. And so in the terminology of Ashlag, there's what's called Sfarim and Sofrim. The books, the holy books, and the Sofrim, those wise souls that have actually been able to go further with this. Well, I suggest that we turn to our text, or we're never going to not that we have to cover materially here, but we know that we want to learn what Rabbi Ashlag had to say and understand it in the context of the kind of descriptions that we just discussed. We left off in section 2. He began section 2, which talks about the idea of the light and the vessel being created together. And we're on the second page of section 2 in the commentary, which begins with, to the extent that. It says, the extent that the levels descend further from the light of his countenance and become distant from him, to that extent is manifested the desire to receive that is included in the shepherd. When we talk about the levels here, that is referring to the light, the desire to give selflessly. And that light is descending, and corresponding to the descending of the light is a descent of the vessel of the desire to receive, which then is parallel to that level of light. To the extent that the levels descend, so to that extent is manifested the desire to receive, he says. Excuse me. And the commentary then says, again, there is no physical space in spiritual reality. Descent here means a differentiation in form from the source of emanation. Ascent means acquiring a similarity of form, a similar quality. The Creator's unqualified attribute is the one who is good and the giver of goodness. That's how we can conceive of the Creator. We are considered ascending to the extent that we progress in the direction of acquiring this attribute. That is, to the extent that we desire to give to others. We are considered descending to the extent that we progress in the opposite direction. That is, to the extent that we desire to receive for our own benefit. And I'm saying here that we can subjectively sense whether or not we have more of this desire to give or more of the desire to receive. And then Baal Hasulam goes on and says, and similarly, the opposite can be stated. He says, similarly, the opposite. What he means, he's actually going to say the same thing. He's going to say it in a reverse way. We'll see. He says, corresponding to the degree of manifestation of the desire to receive within the shefa, the vessel, there is a gradual descent from level to level, as will be explained in what follows. Right? So this says that according as the vessel descends, the desire to receive becomes more material, then we find that the light that was received within that vessel will also have a lower quality. So here we have the commentary says the two statements express the same truth from different perspectives. The first statement attributes the descent to the spiritual levels, that is, the light. The second statement attributes the descent to the materialization of the desire to receive. So we have to explain, what is the difference between the levels and the desire received within the levels? So a level is a particular revelation of the Creator. Souls begin with the form they possess when included in the idea of creation. Remember the idea that God wants to give goodness to his creation. That's the idea of creation. And the soul's vessel senses less light. It senses less this desire to give selflessly. That's what light is. Remember, that's what we're referring to here. So the first statement then emphasizes that the Creator formed a progression of levels that the soul must pass through, starting from the soul's inclusion in the idea of creation and descending through levels of lesser revelation. Descending from level to level constitutes the materialization of the desire to receive within the soul. And this means that the desire to receive becomes more focused on its own self-benefit, and the desire to give becomes diminished. So we said as we go down in levels, then the desire to receive will go down in level. The second statement is from the perspective of the soul's desire to receive. as the cloudiness or this thickness of the desire to receive increases, as we distance ourselves from the Creator, it necessitates the soul's descent from level to level. There is less light that is revealed. Just because it is unable to experience the divine revelation in the way it could before the increase in the cloudiness, in the desire to receive for ourselves. So, okay. So as the light decreases, so the vessel becomes more material. As the vessel becomes more material, so the light decreases. Basically saying the same thing, just from a different perspective. And then Baal Hasulam says, until we get to the lowest level, where the desire to receive is manifested in all the manner that is fitting to its nature or to its function. And that place is labeled Olam HaAsiyah. So in this Olam HaAsiyah, desire to receive arrives at its maximal state, where it is entirely devoted to receiving for its own benefit and has no connection at all, and naturally, to the desire to give. Okay? And that place, we call it Olam HaAsiyah, the world of doing, if you will. And we'll see that there are 4 worlds that are referred to as Atzilut, Bria, Yitzia, Asiyah, or emanation, creation, formation, and doing. And the lowest world then is the world of Asiyah.
So
and it's called,
don't we see a lot of, in everyone, but in some people it's stronger, a strong desire to give, partially, even if it's opportunistic, because we feel that the world is, or the society is better the more we give to society for practical reasons. Whatever tzedakah we give, volunteering, giving to our family, giving to our friends. There's a strong desire to give, but we don't live in a world of which there's only a desire to receive.
Absolutely right. There is a desire to give. However, if we take a careful look, we'll often, if not always, find that there is some or other hidden agenda there. Whether it just be some kind of psychological pat on the back that we give ourselves for being such a do-gooder, or whether there be some more physical kind of payback that we get, we see that a purity of desire to give is rare. It's something that comes out of true love for the other. When that love exists, when we realize the greatness of the other and our connection with the other, then we may begin to sense that. But usually that is not what we find. And so the idea of being, like humanitarian, right? Just with people, and I want to be a do-gooder, and people are important, and I want to support people. Well, Baal Hasulam has a very, very harsh statement regarding that thing. He says, this is like donkeys looking after other donkeys. And instead of understanding that the donkey is there in order to serve the people that the donkey can be serving, if a donkey is there just to serve other donkeys, then that's nothing. So human beings that are just there, and then that's their only intention, is to serve other people rather than realizing that they're serving other people because that's what God wants to do, because that's what connects them to God. So those are like donkeys serving other donkeys, as opposed to people serving God and doing it by way of promoting this kind of society that you're referring to, where there is giving, right? And this is why he says, even though he's often referred to, Baal Hasulam, as a communist, why he says that communism won't work because it doesn't have this element of recognizing that the idea of that we're in it together comes from the idea that we're connected to God. Okay?
And also, it sounded very, if I can say, very condescending.
Well, one has to know how to listen to these kind of condescend.
Yeah, because there
It's
are people that really are altruistic, or they spend their life cleaning up plastic from the ocean. Why? They want to clean up the environment. I mean, pure altruism. They get nothing out of it except the satisfaction. Reminds me of learning the Shema. It's a very tough idea because
yeah, no,
there's always some return somehow. Even people that think they're giving for no reason, they're always getting something out of it, some level of
Jeff,
satisfaction.
not belittling that entirely, but it's saying that in the end won't work. You'll find that people who can be humanitarian in this kind of way, when they, hear different things, say that, maybe that the Torah is requiring you to do and how you're supposed to relate to people in society, they'll have tremendous hatred and, and be totally, against that kind of thing. And a different kind of quality will come out because it doesn't connect to their natural idea of what it means to be this kind of do-gooder. Understand? And there's a lot of good that comes out of obviously what people do for one for another, and things that we can support as being good. And we want to, in some way, harness that kind of goodness for what we see as being the ultimate good. But if we don't do that, if we just let that be, and as it is, then that will eventually lead to something which will be not so nice. That's the claim.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I view it as a more balanced perspective. If someone would be totally giving, 100%, for sure this person would be taking advantage of it every turn of his life, and he's going to like it because he wants to give. So, but he's not going to get very far because everyone's going to take advantage
Okay,
of this guy.
so just stick with us and see if your opinion doesn't change at some point. Okay, but we want to see how that we can widen the scope of our giving and not just to be something that comes, in this sense, naturally to those that have that quality of humanitarian concerns.
The
Okay?
Gemara has a story about a rabbi that goes out to buy things for his daughter's wedding. And then when people see him, they run away from him because they know he's going to want to give that limited funds for tzedakah and that's what he does. He gives it away. And the wife is pretty upset. The daughter's God makes a miracle for him. Okay, but most people don't have those miracles. In fact, no one has miracles done to them. But that's an example of someone who's very giving lishma.
Right. And this is the idea of learning what's important and what has value and what is less important has less value. And that I can't say, that anybody I know has completed that process, but that's what we want to be doing more and more. And the stories that you refer to individuals who had a different look about what was important and what was not important than other people that appear in this story. Okay, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to continue with the text and to see how this all comes out within Baal Hasulam. So we're talking about the Olama Asiyah, the world of doing. And I said here the reason that it's called the world of doing is because this is where we do things like mitzvot. And when we study the Torah, the things that we say will work to purify our soul. And another reason it's called Asiyah is in this world is because this world God is hidden the most, right? Alam in general means hiddenness. And in this world, God is hidden to the greatest degree. And therefore, since we don't see the divinity, we don't see what's important, we have to believe. We have to just do what the Torah tells us that we're supposed to do in order to be connected with that. And so this doing, this I believe, emunah in Hebrew, is something that is characteristic of the world in which God is hidden, which is the world of Asiyah. So we say the desire to receive is designated as the aspect of a person's body, Baal Hasulam says. But when he says body, we have to understand the body mentioned here is not our physical body of flesh and bones, but rather an aspect of our soul. We're talking the bodily aspect of our soul, of our consciousness. Our soul has a spiritual part and a bodily part. The light is the spiritual part. The desire to give selflessly is the spiritual part. And the desire to receive is designated as the bodily part. This is because the relationship between light and vessel is similar to this relationship between soul and body. And the Shefa, right, what is received from Hashem, this desire to give selflessly, the Shefa received is considered as the content of the body's life, what fulfills the desire to receive that we have. So there's an interesting comment here. The level of life that illuminates the desire to receive depends on the level of the desire to receive. But did I read that correctly? The level of life, yes. The light that it illuminates, that which gives us motivation, that which where we find value, that depends on the level of the desire to receive. For example, if a person wants to receive physical, animalistic pleasures, then the substance of the life of this body is animalistic. The shefa received is a shefa of pleasure, clothed in animalistic desires and nothing more. If a person desires intellectual pleasures, then intellectual pleasures are the substance of the life in this body. All this comes from God. God wants us to have pleasure. Our spiritual tendencies, here, it can be developed, what I said before, by learning holy books and being in the presence of spiritual people. What I said was Svarim and Sofrim. This can ignite in us a yearning for such divine union, and that union can gradually lead to a transformation of our nature. Our nature that we're given is one to receive. That has to be transformed only by God, by after we make a preparation for that and move in that direction, then transformation to be a desire to give. So instead of looking at what's in it for me all the time, how and I can receive, I'm looking at all the time, how can I serve? What can I give to the other?
So if somebody wants to be a doctor because he wants to help people, that's his main goal. Is that a desire to receive because he has to do a lot to become a doctor? Or is the goal of helping people, is that driving him so that these both characteristics are really intertwined and almost can't be disentangled? That's a
The
question.
point is that it cannot be determined abstractly in this way. It's the form, the external form that you're referring to, doctor wanting to help other people, right? It doesn't tell me what's going on, what's the inner motivation within the person. Okay, so if the doctor is doing it because this gives him a lot of respect, because his wife is going to love him, or
no, he wants to be a doctor to help people,
whatever, and he enjoys helping people, and he gets enjoyment from that. It can be a very subtle thing. Okay, and it may be obviously a mixed bag. Okay,
so why can't it be a spiritual goal?
If he's doing it because he's learned Torah and he sees how that's what Hashem wants, and he sees that this is his way of serving God, and then it may be that this is someone who's really a very righteous, holy person and everything, and this is the form in which he's doing in order to be serving God, and that's a wonderful thing. There's no question about it. So again, the external form will not tell us. We have to go within, and really only that person can go within. Maybe only God can go within. But in any event, it's the inner experience that we're referring to here, and not any external form that it might take. So we can't
the question though is that there's a lot of receiving before the giving in the preparation, so that they can't be disentangled in a way. In this case, to be the giving person, he has to receive a lot to get to all in his soul, all very soulful. This is an example of someone who desires to give, but he's got to receive a lot first. So I'm one of these characteristics about a person can be divided in a black and white way, of which it sounds it sounds very black and white at the moment.
Right. Well, actually, also Baal Hasulam says that, I mean, there's no such thing as a person that doesn't want to receive. Right? And in some sense, that's always something that's working. But we're talking about a process, a very gradual process of refining that. Okay. So there's a continual becoming aware of what's going on with me and what's am I looking for, and letting go of that, and only remaining not with the luxury of getting self benefit, but only with what is absolutely necessary. So reducing my receiving to the minimal, what is really necessary, and increasing my giving to the maximum of what I can do. And that's a gradual process that we learn to do through learning this material and actually putting it into practice. That's the idea. Okay. And let me just read one more section, if I may. The Shefa received. Did I read that? That's everybody read that. Sorry. Okay. And he says, and this is the way it is also with the other beings in this world. I think this is interesting. And it's not just people. He says, all the myriad beings in the world, mineral, this table, mineral, vegetable, animal, all come from the Creator's idea of creation called Ein Sof. Nothing here that you see is not something that God created. God created it all. Indeed, there cannot exist anything that is not included in the idea of creation. Thus, the soul of an animal is also comprised of light and vessel, as we said. That is the Shefa and a particular animalistic quality of desire to receive. The soul of an animal also gradually descends from the idea of creation through all the spiritual worlds until arriving in the material world. This means that at its source, the soul of an animal is in a state of holiness and connected to a high spiritual root. Everything is. Okay? Now, whether or not that is something that within time and space in this world will be revealed is another story altogether. That we didn't say. But if someone had eyes to see this fifth dimension, the source of creation, we would see everything as coming from that source. And certainly we would see the animal also as having that connection to Creator, and therefore having a holy source as well. In other words, we would see God everywhere. Right? And so I said Baal Hasulam, so that the only distinction between the upper worlds and this world is that as long as the desire to receive included in the Shefa is not manifested in its final form, it is considered to be within the spiritual worlds above this world. When the desire to receive is manifested in its final form as a desire to receive in order to receive, then it is considered to be existent in this world. So the final form, again, is the desire to receive has become completely blocking out the idea of divinity, completely cloudy to its maximum degree. It wants to swallow up everything for its own benefit. Only I exist, the ego, only that exists. It has no conception of a desire to give. And when we speak about this world, you said this is not speaking about the material world of planet Earth, right? But rather this world, but in all this conversation, all this text, this world is an aspect of consciousness. Everything we're talking about is only consciousness, right? So in this state, the desire to receive becomes coarse to its maximum degree, and the light is reduced to a minimum. That is this world, where we have only the desire to receive for ourselves and lack any perception of the desire to give selflessly. So we may, again, sense that we're not always that materialistic. We're not always that connected to this world as we learn Torah and we're connected, we pray, and we're connected to God, the mitzvot, we may have some sense of higher worlds and be connected to our higher self. But this world, when we refer to it, that's referring to this lowest state of consciousness. Okay, now that ends our discussion of section 2, and I have already given to Arthur to make available to everyone sections 3 and 4. And so, God willing, next time we can start with section 3. And thank you for listening to me this week. All the best.
Thank you very much.